they've got to get down there. They've got to try and find them, fight the terrorists who are very familiar with this ground in near darkness, and find it very difficult to know where they are. And of course, the other thing is identifying who are the terrorists, who are the hostages, and who are the civilians. So a huge task for the Israelis to conquer.
Just explain to people, what are we talking about here? Are they very narrow? Are they very wide? What kinds of tunnels does Hamas have?
Well, these are hugely extensive under the whole of the Gaza Strip. Some of them are wide enough to drive sort of lorries up and down, and some of them are so small you can only crawl through them. It is incredibly difficult unless you're very familiar with the layout to find your way around. There's probably a very dimly lit in a lot of cases, shortage of air, and the thought of actually fighting underground. One only has to read some of the accounts of the fight in the Vietnam War and the tunnels there, of how horrific and extended they can be. But it seems a reasonable assumption that most of the hostages are in these tunnels, and the Israelis' first aim appears to be to rescue them. So they've got to get down there. They've got to try and find them, fight the terrorists who are very familiar with this ground in near darkness, and find it very difficult to know where they are. And of course, the other thing is identifying who are the terrorists, who are the hostages, and who are the civilians. So a huge task for the Israelis to conquer.
And there are suggestions that the Israelis have for, a couple of days now been mapping out entrances and exits to these tunnels, trying to work out exactly where they are, what they run close to, and how to block them off. I mean, you've outlined really in part there, but how difficult is it going to be for the Israelis? Because they won't know the tunnels as well as Hamas do. And as we say, that there are many miles of them to be navigated.
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge. And what I think has been happening over the last few weeks is the Israelis have been what we call shaping the battlefield, collecting intelligence to try and find out where these key entrances are, where the escape routes might be, where are the choke points. And of course, all these things are then guarded by Hamas fighters above ground. So it is a massive undertaking, and I'm sure nobody would want to go into this type of warfare, because it is no doubt, unfortunately, we are going to see an awful lot of casualties unless there is some negotiated settlement where the hostages can be released. It seems pretty sure that the Israeli Defense Force are absolutely set on rescuing them. And it is going to take time, take an awful lot of Israeli forces, and sadly, there are going to be an awful lot of casualties. This is the most challenging, difficult type of warfare imaginable. And as you say, the Hamas terrorists know the ground far better than the Israelis, I expect. But the Israelis do have very specialized special forces for doing this sort of thing. But if the hostages are killed when they're trying to rescue them, the mission will not be a success. And that is the key thing that the Israelis are trying to do. We all hope, at the last gasp, there will be some sort of negotiated settlement. Perhaps the Qataris can come in. The Russians are obviously doing their best to stoke up, to throw fuel on this fire. But the only way I think all these hostages are going to get out safely is through a negotiated settlement. The fight is going to be horrific.
And finally, briefly, Hamish, there is also a threat of chemical weapons involved here, isn't there?
Well, certainly we've seen in other underground conflicts the use of chemical weapons. In fact, the Russians, very well-known attack on a theatre in Moscow by Chechen separatists underground. The Russians used fentanyl, basically knocked everybody out to try and attack the terrorists. So chemicals are something that are incredibly effective underground. It would appear that Hamas does have cyanide chemical weapons. That's certainly what the Israelis are saying. But again, the Israelis will be well trained in this sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's the hostages that will not probably have gas masks or respirators. They're the ones who will suffer.